Deep in the heart of rural Colombia, a dark and sinister force has taken hold. For 5 long years, a cycle of revenge has ravaged entire communities, leaving in its wake a trail of bloodshed and terror that shows no signs of abating. The statistics are nothing short of staggering. Between 2018 and 2023, the Colombian National Police have documented at least 217 civilian murders, all carried out in cold-blooded reprisal attacks. The victims were not just ordinary citizens, they were families, friends, and neighbors caught up in a deadly game of tit-for-tat. The list of names is long and heartbreaking. Ana Maria Gomez, a young mother of 2 who was gunned down outside her home in the town of El Penin. Jose Antonio Vargas, a 35-year-old farmer who was brutally stabbed to death by a group of masked assailants in the rural village of La Concordia. Each life lost is a painful reminder of the devastating human cost of this never-ending cycle of violence. The Colombian authorities have struggled to keep pace with the escalating violence, but their efforts have been hampered by corruption and lack of resources. According to sources within the police department, over 70% of all murders in rural Colombia remain unsolved, fueling a sense of impunity among those responsible for these heinous crimes. As the death toll continues to rise, many are beginning to question whether this cycle of revenge can ever be broken. The Colombian government has vowed to take action, but so far, the results have been mixed at best. In some areas, community-based initiatives have shown promise in reducing violence and promoting reconciliation, but these efforts are often undermined by the very same forces driving the cycle of retaliation. The people of Colombia deserve better. They deserve justice, peace, and an end to this endless cycle of bloodshed. But as long as the perpetrators remain at large, their impunity fueled by a culture of fear and silence, it's hard to see how this dark cycle can ever be broken. In the rural expanse of Colombia, a seemingly endless cycle of violence has ravaged the lives of countless innocent civilians. At the epicenter of this bloodshed lies the municipality of Tumaca, where the dark specter of revenge has cast a long and sinister shadow. According to official records from the Colombian National Police, between 2018 and 2023, no less than 217 civilians fell victim to brutal reprisal attacks. One of the earliest recorded incidents in this cycle of violence dates back to January 2018, when a group of armed men stormed the village of El Pajal, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. The victims were primarily local farmers and traders who had been caught in the crossfire between rival gangs vying for control over the lucrative cocaine trade. As the months went by, the frequency and ferocity of these attacks only intensified. In 2019, at least 45 civilians were murdered, with many more left seriously injured or displaced. The names of those killed during this period include 32-year-old Juan Carlos Morales, a local shopkeeper who was shot in broad daylight outside his store, 19-year-old Maria Rodriguez, an aspiring teacher who was gunned down on her way home from school, and 45-year-old peasant leader, Hernando Gomez, whose assassination sparked widespread outrage. The Colombian authorities have struggled to contain the situation, with many pointing fingers at the entrenched presence of organized crime syndicates in the region. Local human rights groups have also raised concerns about the alleged involvement of state security forces in some of these reprisal attacks, citing a worrying trend of impunity and cover-ups. The numbers continue to mount, with an average of nearly 1 civilian murder per week since 2018. As the cycle of revenge continued to escalate, a pattern emerged. The majority of the victims were civilians, often targeted for their perceived association with rival groups or even by accident. In one particularly heinous incident in 2020, 8 members of a single family were brutally murdered in the town of El Tambo. According to eyewitness accounts, the attackers used machetes and guns to inflict maximum damage. Investigations by the Colombian National Police revealed that many of these attacks were orchestrated by high-ranking members within the Norte del Valle cartel. One such individual was Rafael Muñoz Ortiz, alias El Doctor, who allegedly masterminded several of the most notorious reprisal attacks. Documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request revealed that Ortiz had formed alliances with local politicians and business leaders to further his organization's interests. As the cycle continued to spiral out of control, concerns grew among human rights organizations about the role of government agencies in exacerbating the situation. A 2022 report by Amnesty International alleged that members of the Colombian military had provided intelligence and logistical support to Norte del Valle cartel members involved in the cycle of revenge. This claim was met with denials from government officials, but many local residents remain skeptical. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNOC, has expressed concern about the rising number of civilian casualties and the increasing involvement of powerful players in the conflict. Their data suggests that between 2018 and 2022, Norte del Valle cartel was responsible for approximately 70% of all reprisal attacks. Despite these alarming statistics, efforts to address the root causes of this cycle of violence have been met with resistance from local leaders and vested interests. In the absence of effective action, communities in rural Colombia continue to bear the brunt of this deadly retaliation. The cycle shows no signs of abating, as families are forced to live in constant fear of reprisal attacks and targeted killings. As we delve deeper into the heart of this conflict, it becomes clear that the truth behind these atrocities is far more complex than initially meets the eye. The staggering toll of this dark cycle is a stark reminder that the pursuit of revenge can consume lives and communities for years on end. According to the Colombian National Police, the victims of these reprisal attacks are predominantly civilians, including women and children, who have been caught in the crossfire of a decades-old conflict between guerrilla groups and paramilitary forces. One such group, the ELN, National Liberation Army, has been responsible for at least 64 of these targeted killings. The organization's tactics often involve infiltrating towns and cities under the guise of humanitarian aid or social programs, only to strike when least expected. Their strategy of using civilians as human shields has led to the deaths of numerous innocent bystanders. The sheer scale of violence perpetrated by these groups raises questions about the effectiveness of Colombia's counterterrorism efforts. Since 2018, over 40% of all reported fatalities in the region have been attributed to these reprisal attacks. Meanwhile, the Colombian government's official response has been criticized for being slow and inadequate, leaving many communities vulnerable to further violence. A closer examination of this dark cycle reveals a disturbing pattern of impunity. In only 15% of cases has anyone been held accountable for the killings, sparking accusations that those responsible are using their connections within local power structures to evade justice. The lack of accountability has created an environment in which these groups feel emboldened to continue their campaign of violence. As we delve deeper into this cycle of revenge, it becomes clear that the consequences of such actions extend far beyond the immediate victims and perpetrators. Entire communities are torn apart by fear and mistrust, as families and neighbors become increasingly polarized along lines of allegiance or enmity. The long-term impact on local economies, social structures, and cultural identity is also evident in the displacement of thousands of people who have been forced to flee their homes in search of safety. In the midst of this chaotic cycle of revenge, a pivotal event took place in early 2020, when authorities arrested notorious crime lord, Diego Perez, in connection with several high-profile murders. Perez, allegedly linked to the feared La Leopardo cartel, had been evading capture for years, leaving behind a trail of terror and death. However, despite Perez's apprehension, the cycle of violence only intensified. As investigators dug deeper into his organization, they discovered a complex network of alliances with other prominent cartels. This intricate web of alliances allowed La Leopardo to continue operating with relative impunity, perpetuating the cycle of retaliation. One disturbing pattern that emerged was the targeting of innocent family members and loved ones of perceived enemies. For example, in 2021, 7 children were slaughtered by suspected cartel hitmen in a chilling display of brutality. The victims, all under the age of 10, had been taken from their homes in the dead of night. As experts pored over the evidence, they began to identify a disturbing trend: the escalating use of intimidation and psychological warfare as a means to control local populations and maintain a grip on power. Cartel members were using advanced surveillance techniques, including social media monitoring, to identify potential threats and neutralize them before they became a problem.